tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. People can, of course, continue meditating. You can sit with your eyes open or your eyes closed, however you're most comfortable. And I appreciate that most people are still here. I did see a little kid get rushed out of the room halfway through that meditation, which is fair enough. If I'd known there was a kid, I might not have said that we're all living inside of skeletons, but it's true. It's true. Hope she's caught up away that she didn't hear that. She's not ready for it. She's not ready for it. But that meditation is one which is based on a method of body contemplation, which in the Pali Canon, or in the Theravada school, is called meditation on the 32 parts of the body. And we actually have the version in English and in Pali in this chanting book. And there's a monk named Bhante Analayo who has basically taken that meditation on the 32 parts and essentialized it down to those 3 parts of the body. So that's the skin and the muscles and the flesh of the body and the bones. And this is a chant, and it's a practice which is, it's been practiced since the time of the Buddha, when he himself practiced, when he recommended his disciples to practice. And the reason that I thought it would be good to do that practice here is because this month, Nisabo and I will largely be giving talks on the topic of what's called the viññāṇa-khandha, or the 5 aggregates. These are the 5 aspects which are basically what all of us, any human being, the main experiences of the internal perception of having a body and mind. We've got these 5 things, and the first one is the body, what's called rūpa. And for this talk, and as you experienced in that meditation, we're looking at the relationship between this first aggregate and the 5th aggregate, which is consciousness. So what we were largely practicing with during the past half hour was consciousness, or knowing the body, Those middle aggregates, those middle 3 of the 5 aggregates are feeling and perception and mental formations, and then that's 3. So we've got form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And for the rest of this month, we'll be going in and describing those in detail for people who are part of our Upasaka group, or our kind of dedicated practitioners program through our website. We have recommended readings from a book called Buddha Dhamma, and people can follow along there to read more. But this interaction between form, between the body and consciousness is quite fascinating. Hopefully, as people have experienced in their own meditations, or began to intimate, when you bring the mind into the body, I think a lot of people, certainly myself included, easy to just feel like the default, or just feel that the mind is somehow stationed behind the eyes. You've got the mind which is just looking out through the eyeballs at the world around us, and that's where consciousness lives. That's where the knowing resides. And you look at everything else from this little creature, this mini-me, like behind the eyes. And what is fascinating when you practice this, either the 32 parts of the body or really paying attention to any specific one of the 32 parts, or the three as we practice, is that you begin to have a different relationship with these different parts of the body. You begin to have a more realistic relationship with these parts of the body. And you learn that you can actually feel these parts, hopefully, from inside that part itself. So you can feel the foot from inside the foot. It's almost as if you unhook your mind, unhook consciousness from whatever you're wanting to think, whatever the mind is, the train of thought you're on. You can just unhook or release and then drop down and feel the body from the inside. And the Buddha gave a number of different ways to conceive of this body in a more realistic manner. Form, or rupa, as it's talked about, is really the same thing in the science of Buddhism, the same thing in the Buddha Dhamma, in the teachings of the Buddha, as it is in Western biology, as it is in Western physics, as it is in Western anatomy. There's nothing magic about this body. There's nothing Buddhist about this body. Even if you're dressed up like a monk or like a layperson, this body is just a body, and there's nothing Eastern or Western about this body. It's just a body, and that's how it's portrayed in the earliest Buddhist texts. And what's interesting is that sometimes when people are new to Buddhism, people can expect that you're going to get some kind of magical portrait of the body and mind in a way which is inconsistent with Western science, but that's definitely not the case. And you do have some frameworks for relating to the body, like these 32 parts, which, Western doctors don't talk about 32 parts of the body. They might try to count the bones or count the musculature. We've got different ways of talking about it. The cells of the body, different types of cells, the different organs. And at the time of the Buddha just used the framing of the day, which is just these 32 parts. You've got hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, bone marrow, tendons, etc., on down through the 32 parts. You can look in the chanting book and see what those are, the 32 parts are, and it is an interesting list to see how it compares with Western anatomy ways of talking about the different systems of the body, but really it's not that important which way of organizing the body's systems, the anatomical parts you conceive of, whether you're thinking in terms of the limbic system or the skeletal system or the muscular system, as most of us have learned it, like in our traditional Western education, or in this more traditional Buddhist way of framing things. It's just a body, it's just organs, and we're learning to feel them from the inside. This list of the 32 parts comes up in many foundational texts of Buddhism, which people who are only maybe even just starting to get to know Buddhism become familiar with, like the Satipatthana Sutta, or the Foundations of Mindfulness. This is the probably the main meditation sutta which you find in the Pali Canon. And in that sutta, the Buddha talks about knowing the body as a body, and he gives a number of different meditation techniques which allow you to know this body from the inside, and know the body as a body, or know the body in the body, kaye kayanupassana. You see, or you know the body inside the body, as a body, in and of itself. You know the body in and of itself. And these 32 parts are one of those things. And if you live in a monastery, or you read this list, or you have some kind of connection with Buddhist texts and you find it inspiring, it can be quite a fascinating way to relate to the body, because it's new. I'd say as monks, one of our rules is that we don't listen to music, And I think one of the reasons for that is that so much, at least for me, the music that I was listening to, which was largely rap and R&B, kind of hardcore rap and R&B, from being a high schooler, it's not, I don't have so many dhammic connotations, related to that music. So when it comes up in the mind, it can often just take me off somewhere, basically where I was in high school, basically high school mind, and that's not necessarily where I always want to be living if I'm just sitting in a hut in a monastery somewhere. But you've got Buddhist music, so there's a kind of popular Buddhist loving-kindness song, which, for me, not at all Buddhist in high school, but I learned this Buddhist metta song, or any of these chants that we do in our chanting book. Karaniyama takusalena yantam santam param abhisameja. It has a tune, and it's nice. And if you hang around in monasteries, that's what's going to be floating around in your mind. And it just got totally wholesome connotations to it. It's a totally different singing. The mind, the brain still likes to sing to itself, but this only has positive connotations in my mind with it. And similarly, if you're thinking of the body in these different frameworks from the Buddhist time, then you might be able to shift your bodily narrative. So from one of the craving and just looking at bodies and thinking, that one's beautiful, or that one's unbeautiful, or that one's somewhere in between, or I'm beautiful today, or my hair's messed up, or I don't have any hair, or I need to shave, or I got some cuts on my face, or whatever it is. Those are all the worldly narratives, the ways that most of us are used to talking to ourselves all the time, especially if you have a mirror. That's another thing. Buddhist monks are not supposed to use mirrors. So we're reinforcing our all these self-reflective views that we're this is me, this space in the mirror, this is me. We're doing that a lot less. And the frameworks of Western anatomy, or these different bodily systems, which we talk about in Western medicine, there's nothing wrong with them, but they might have other connotations in your mind which are not helpful, or maybe they are, but you're totally free to think about the body as you like. Another framework in the Satipatthana Sutta, that Foundations of Mindfulness, or in the Anapanasati Sutta, the Sutta on mindfulness of breathing, or the Kayagata-sati Sutta, the mindfulness of the body. All of these mention the 32 parts, and they mention another framework which is called the 4 elements. And this is another way of feeling the body from the inside. And it's quite fascinating. It's the same 4 elements that you find in Western philosophy. So like Plato, Aristotle, basically most philosophers, and even people who are dissecting bodies, are oftentimes thinking of these 4 elements. And it's the same in East and West. You've got the fire element, which is the heat of the body. You've got the earth element, which is the hard parts of the body. You've got the water elements, which is the liquid and the fluid parts of the body. And then you've got the air elements, which are basically the breath and the movement in the body. And for anyone who's come across these humors, or these different 4 elements in whether in Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist meditation, or in Western philosophy, you might think that's a rather quaint or antiquated, old way and superstitious way of looking at the body. But at least in the Buddha Dhamma, it's much less, any kind of fact-based ontological statement of this is the only way to look at the body, as these 4 essential kind of like Captain Planet type conceptions of the world, but more as this is how the body feels from the inside. Right now, although we do have all these organs that you see in anatomy textbooks, we do have a heart, we do have lungs, we do have liver, we do have spleen, we do have a gallbladder, we do have large intestines, small intestines. We don't feel those. Most of us cannot really feel those. So conceiving of the body in this other way, okay, what is hard inside the body? What is this hardness inside the body? And what I feel as being hard inside the body, again, that, chomping your teeth, that's, when you pay attention in a certain way, really interesting. This hard part in the body, what is the difference between these hard parts of the body and hard parts of the world around us? When I click my nail on the floor, is there anything different between the hardness of my teeth clacking and just tapping the floor? The hardness is the same. Just an impersonal, it's just, this is what it's like having a body, living in the world with consciousness. Feeling the hard parts from the inside and the liquid parts. When you feel your pulse, that's your blood. That's the blood running through the body, your blood and other people's blood. It's not you. You can get a transfusion this afternoon if you want. Actually, I don't know if you can really do that. I don't know if it's a man or not, but if you have a connection, maybe you could. But blood is not personal. You wouldn't be able to tell. Again, you have to put it in a lineup with a bunch of other people's, and you would have no idea which one was yours. Blood has been read and coursing through human bodies since way before the time of the Buddha, and all the way up until us. And these fluid parts of the body, you can feel them in the body from the inside, and that's fascinating. And the Buddha is feeling the same liquid element as we feel when we pay attention to the moving fluids in our own body. And you've got the heat element. When you pay attention to your skin, at your lower back, or under the arms, or behind the knees, it's just heat. There's nothing personal about it. And this, all of these reflections, 32 parts, the 4 elements, just knowing the posture, they're all depersonalizing our experience, our deeply lived experience from day to day, taking it out of the realm of the narratives and the stories that we make up and tell about my body and your body and her body and his body and their body and whatever. And it's just heat, or it's just hardness or liquidity. And we've got the air. At what point does the air that comes in our noses as we breathe, when does that become my air? Is it like that invisible, circumference at the base of the nostrils, that little circle of imagined space? Is that when atmosphere becomes air, becomes me? It's just a ridiculous question. It just doesn't make any sense. The air outside and the air inside are just air element. This depersonalizes, takes away the narrative, which is so important. That's what we're trying to do, because it's our narratives, and it's our clinging and our mixed up awareness of our bodies and our minds, which causes suffering for us, which causes all our problems. We take this body as mine. It's not like this body is yours. We protect our own bodies, but it's in one profound sense, a very profound sense. This body is not ours. These organs they're not personal. And when we're able to shift into that mode and see that and feel that, then that allows us to let go. It allows the body to relax, which is a huge part of meditation and Buddhist practice. There's a sequence, which you see again and again in the text, of different wholesome mind states leading to what's called pamoja, or gladness. This gladness leading to joy, this joy leading to physical joy, kaya passaddhi, and that physical joy, or that physical delight, leading to happiness or sukha, and then sukha leading to samadhi or collectiveness of mind. So this is a step-by-step progression from, say, keeping precepts or having faith or practicing loving kindness or practicing wisdom, seeing the body in and of itself, that leading to gladness, leading to joy, leading to physical tranquility of the body, of this impersonal body, and that leading to happiness, and that leading to concentration, that leading to collectedness. So finding different ways to be able to let go from an emotional level, from an intellectual level, and from the felt tactile sense, just being able to exhale and relax. It's very important. So yeah, we can look at the body in these different ways, and what is looking at this body is consciousness, this fifth aggregate. And that is really important, because if there was no consciousness, then the body would just be a lump of flesh and bones and all the other things. It would just be a body. And this is one thing which monks do in Thailand and other Buddhist countries, is that actually going certainly to chant at funerals or to chant at cremations. Many monasteries, including the International Monastery where Tanisabo and I both spent time, there's actually a cremation ground in the monastery itself. And when villagers pass away, the body will be brought to the monastery, and you actually, much more, so many Americans can live, their whole life, or at least, until they're 30 or 40 or even 50, and never see a dead body. And when you see a dead body, you begin to intuit, and you almost sense quite deeply the profound nature of this consciousness, is that body does not have consciousness. That body, totally laying there as it is devoid of consciousness. So exercising our consciousness, knowing the body in different ways, and practicing in this ways. This consciousness is our avenue for knowing. It's our avenue for practicing, and it's good to become familiar with this and be able to shift into these different ways of knowing, these different ways of directing consciousness. And because it's fascinating. How often have you actually tried to feel the calf from inside the calf? And you can do it, and that's quite weird, actually, that you can do it. My mother is a physician, and even someone trained in Western medicine. It's not necessarily the case. I apologize, Mom, if you're watching. But it's not necessarily the case that just studying anatomy will give you any necessarily deep, profound insights that lead to letting go. It really is a matter of training our consciousness as well. And she was bringing me to the airport and doing this guided meditation about knowing the foot from inside the foot. And she's trying to drive too, so I'm not trying to go too deep with her. But feeling the foot from inside the foot. And how is that, Mom? How does that happen? She goes, the nerve, it's just nerve ending, going up the spine, going through all these different nerves up to the brain. And I said, that's definitely true. The Buddha wouldn't deny that, but like the actual feeling of it from the foot, how do you explain that? And you just, you can't. It's called the hard problem of consciousness. Why we can know these particular elements are just parts of the world, but how can we just know? But the Buddha doesn't necessarily try to explode or answer that question in a philosophical sense, but just really points that we can know. We can know the body, and we can shift our perspective in this way. We can shift our awareness, and that's an incredibly useful skill to learn about, because you don't want to be stuck in any way of looking at the world, because that will, when that way of looking changes, when the world changes, when your relationships change, then you're going to suffer if you don't know how to shift your perspective. So become more familiar with consciousness, more familiar with the body, and learning how to let go in both of these dimensions is a really useful skill which we can practice, and that's what we're doing in meditation. So in the Dhamma talk there, and open things up for questions or reflection from people.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami.
If people have questions they'd like to ask, it's great, and on the live stream as well, please feel free.
People keep pointing to, oh, someone hidden behind the person. Adam, is that you? Yeah, please.
I feel like during that meditation, it was easier for me to feel my body impersonally. But in times of like physical or emotional pain, it feels like, because of that experience of pain, it feels very much like mine. So that if like I broke my arm, it would feel like my arm was in intense pain or something. Or if like I'm feeling like intense emotional distress, like it feels physical, it feels like this physical pain. That I think makes it more difficult to see my body as this like impersonal thing, as just this existing organic matter. Is there, and I don't necessarily know for me like if when I try to engage with like separating from that, if that's always like a necessary skillful thing, because that experience of pain is still there. So I was wondering if there is like a skillful way to work with that.
So for those who didn't hear the question, Adam was asking, during the guided meditation, it seems easy enough to gain a degree of feeling of separation from the body, or to let go a little bit of it or gain some distance, but in moments of pain, the identification seems immediate and quite compulsive and powerful. And additionally, there was the question of whether it's even skillful in such situations to necessarily every time try to look at the body and the pain as impersonal, because it can seem like a mode of almost bypassing or ignoring something that's a truth. Is that the gist of it? I brought up this memory before, but when I was in Thailand, the hospitals are frequently quite good, but some of them are not, or some of them are quite crowded. So I was in one of the hallways, which was just lined with beds, and
the smells of fluid, people just crying out in pain. And there was this enormous sense of this massive betrayal of the body. You saw suddenly that these things are these fluid-filled, strange, they do their best, but at some point they do and can get sick. And it struck me then what a blessing it was to have the Buddha's encouragement ahead of time to gain some perspective. Because if most of us see fairly clearly that we're somewhat deluded about our death and the fact that it won't happen to us. There's so many movies about someone learning they're going to die and then changing their life. Like, we all understand that we have a blind spot. But our delusion about our body is so deep that most of us have no idea until you have an experience of what's called viññāṇa-khandha in Buddhism. There's 3 levels of knowing in Buddhism. There's sutta-khandha, which is learning by listening or reading what may have occurred with you and listening to Ajahn Kovilo's Dhamma talk. There's chitta-khandha, which is kind of considering and reflecting on those teachings we heard. And then there's bhavana-khandha, which is the knowing of, it's a deeper knowing that originates in large part due to the concentrated mind and samadhi. So this is why someone can be a physician or work in a morgue and still have no real feeling for their own, say, death. Like, they see it, but there's not, it would require something about meditation can let us stop and really see a little more clearly. And it's like this very deep knowing. And with the body, you're right, like when you're in the midst of the pain, sometimes it's a little bit too much to expect yourself to be able to get perspective right then, which is why it's so useful ahead of time to cultivate some meditations where you do look at the body as just so much, skin, flesh, bone. And if you do that with a calm state of mind, especially the afterglow of a calm meditation, you'll have a moment in that meditation where you do click your teeth. And it's really interesting in a very particular way because you sense that it's just bone, it's so many stones. There's no difference between the calcium and it's a really interesting and unique experience, but it's bhavana-khandha. So if you cultivate that ahead of time, that when those push comes to shove, you do have ability to step back a little bit. And as to when that's skillful and not, that is something to be, to navigate for yourself. But in general, a sense of coolness and cooling of your orientation towards the body is a wholesome sign. And then just a feeling that when you're in the hospital, just acknowledging the body, it's just this much. There's a lot of peace to be found there. Someone close to me recently came across someone died close to them, and they had the chance to sit by the body right after it had passed away. And they reflected, like, when they were really there with the body, it really was just a fallen leaf. Like Ajahn Kovilo said like a corpse, but they saw sort of the violence of the reaction in the world to that simple fallen leaf, and it was a whole other thing. So, not to say we shouldn't mourn or care for those who have passed. It's just there's a difference between those two reactions, and getting some perspective on the body is essential, I think, for that.
My question is, the teaching about the body is serves the body, but the consciousness animates it and serves the specialness of consciousness is a little. I think that it feels like that's one way of teaching. I think the teachings that I've been listening to are focused on the body as a way of getting out of your imagination, but seeing what's real and where you're constantly drawn into
a really good point. It's just a reflection that we were just talking about, kind of this, this difference between consciousness or knowing and the body, and talking about the ability to kind of shift and move consciousness around. But you were bringing up the point of like how important it can be to be embodied, as that's real. I mean, that's like in the present moment in a sense. It's more real than our kind of flights of fancy, and that definitely has a place in Buddhist practice. I mean, I mentioned one of these discourses, the discourse on mindfulness of the body. It goes into many different ways of becoming embodied, dropping awareness down from the head, and really just, staying with your mind, with your present inside the body, like all day long, taking that as your foundation. And many of our teachers, Ajahn Kovilo, the abbot of the monastery, Abhayagiri, where I ordained, that's been his practice for his main practice for 40 plus years. And it's huge. There's so much to learn about the body, and taking it as an anchor, kind of like you're talking about the grounded anchor, can be so helpful, especially for most of us who can just be so much in our head, and just way off on some kind of train of thought, and then just totally forget about the body. I mean, you can see it it's sometimes even in people's postures, where you see it like, a lot of time there is a computer room, one room in the monastery at Abhayagiri that has computers, and I mean, you can almost guess how long someone's been in the computer room by like how long. Almost like crawling into the screen. And so that kind of happens, like the mind just goes out through the eyes, is in some thought train, and you've totally forgotten about, the naturalness of the body. And what the point you bring up is a really good one. And that definitely has a place, and you can take that as your anchor. I just mentioned the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The first is knowing body as body in and of itself. The next one is knowing feelings in and of themselves. Then you have knowing mind, where you can also translate that consciousness, knowing consciousness in and of itself. And then the last one is knowing mind states in and of themselves. So some people will just drift or prefer one of those, or one of those might click more than the others. But the body is especially good, I think, for many people all over the world. So thank you for bringing up that point.
I think it's also one of those counterintuitive elements of Buddhist practice, which is, by seeing the body clearly, you don't lose it as an anchor. It's more that you, like the foundations of mindfulness are applying a framework of seeing the body as a body instead of the framework of self to every one of the khandhas and the foundations. So instead of seeing the body in the context of self, like my beautiful body, that unbeautiful body, attractive, not attractive, you just see it as a body. And that lets you, it's like, because the more you know those things from the perspective of the foundations, the more you're stepping back into kind of consciousness, that fifth khandha, and wisdom. So it's a bit like, you're putting down the anchor of the body, and then you're kind of the boat of the consciousness floating above the anchor to it. Whereas most of us, because we identify, it's like the boat's kind of just tied to the anchor and like halfway under the water or something like that. There's some sort of counterintuitive separation that's also grounding and brightening. For me, at least that's an experience.
One thing that I really like about Buddhism is it seems like it's really all there. There isn't much in my experience that I can't find in Buddhism. And part of that is that it's really all framed around ending suffering. And that seems a little counterintuitive to me, that this is sort of like a moral path, but ultimately it's all hinged itself around ending suffering. So we're talking right now a bit about, with some product, the discomfort that we experience through the body, and then also almost like some beneficial aspects grounded nature. And then we're also talking about just observing these both somewhat from an objective sense. And, I guess one of the things about Buddhism also is that there's an element of balance, right? And I've heard some people that aren't really Buddhist communities talk about, Buddha would preach the middle path, right? Not too much, not too little. But also, Rick was brought up once that we were talking, he says that, the middle path also wouldn't necessarily kind of fall in line with what American would consider too much or too little. So, on this discussion around, sensations, energy suffering, and, he described that it's actually quite pleasurable when you get towards these deeper aspects. And then also looking at, the painful aspects of the body. Can you just clear up sort of what is the middle path in, if we're going to say that ultimately you're just observing pleasure, pain, and one of the main things is to observe it objectively. What is really the middle path that is taught as you actually engage in something?
It's a great question about the middle path. Talked about every person's middle path, you suggested, is not the same.
Right.
And that's, so what is the middle path? And it really is so individual. It's not like a middling path or like a kind of lukewarm porridge, all of us are overlost, basically. And we do want to pick the porridge, the bed, the amount of sleep, the amount of meditation. We want to get it just right, and that is so different from one person to the next. And you really do just have to look for yourself. A guiding principle which runs through the whole of the Buddha's teaching is, which as you rightly pointed out, is all about the ending of suffering, recognizing suffering, and figuring out how to unwind that and figure out the cessation of suffering, and figuring out what's right for yourself is this through line is what, when I do it, will lead to the increase of wholesome mind states and decrease of unwholesome mind states. So you can ask yourself that question for any aspect of your life. Food, okay, what when I eat it will lead to, and how much? What and how much when I eat it will lead to the increase of wholesome dhammas, basically. You've got to eat, so eating healthy foods give you energy to practice and to live and to give back, but will lead to the decrease of unwholesome mind states like hunger. There's a mind state. It's also physical, but sleep. How much sleep leads to the increase of wholesome dhammas and maximum decrease of unwholesome dhammas? Ask yourself that question. Or who, when I interact for how long with which people lead to this maximum wholesome mind states, like loving kindness and patience and generosity. And then who are the people who, when I interact with them for this long, in this situation, leads to the opposite, the decrease in wholesome dhammas, increase in unwholesome dhammas. So that will give you your answer for the middle way.
Yeah, from Maryland, somebody asks, does the aggregate of form include forms that might arise in my mind's eye? If I were to visualize a tree, is that tree an example of rūpa?
No. That a mental image is a manifestation of sanya, or perception, like the third aggregate. It's a perception of form, but it itself is not form. So it's not like you have a little tiny tree in your brain. It's a perception of form.
I'd say the one caveat, as far as I know, is sometimes with feeling the bodily internally, they would say that perception of internal form would still be under form, although it is in some form of perception. I don't know, I think Ajahn Kovilo. I think that might be the time we have to today, just so we don't go over too much. If we have one more question, we can probably do it. Yes, John?
Another from the live stream from Vancouver, BC. Can you speak a little to releasing energetic knots in the body? Do you think it's possible to heal old bodily injuries, at least in part, through meditation? I believe I heard Ajahn Jeff speak of a moment in meditation when he released an old energetic knot injury in his foot. And during that release, a memory arose of how the injury had originally occurred.
Yeah. Sorry. The instance that they're talking about is Ajahn Jeff, I think, was working on an energetic knot in his foot, and after a time it released, and he had this memory flash up of when he was a boy, falling out of a loft in a barn and piercing his foot on a nail, and I just sort of flashed into his head after this. And I've heard, it's said also a lot of karma is stored in this sort of bodily field of, internal bodily patterning, basically, which is why developing breath meditation can be so useful in a lot of senses, because you do, as you reacquaint yourself with the body, especially using not just a sort of one, a breath technique focusing on one point and just one point to the exclusion of others like at the nose, but rather one more in line with, say, Ajahn Jeff or Ajahn Sucitto, Ajahn Lee, where you actively develop a wide perception of the body and the breath energy running through the body. You do become more sensitive to those knots. And there's different ways of working with it or with those knots. I know for me, for a time, especially when things get calm, you begin to notice this patterning in the body, like these points of tension arise before thought comes up strongly. And often that would manifest for me as like a clenching in the brain area. And I found initially I was really trying to put my awareness in the lower half of the body to counterbalance. What has worked instead, and what I've heard of spoken in several traditions actually since, is treating them like you would trigger points, which is honestly, the mind kind of wants, in some cases, or in my case, to go to those knots. They're interesting. So I let it go to it, and it clenches around it and then drops into the heart. If you use massage trigger points, you find sort of this point of tension, you press it with the thumb and then it releases. So I found that to be very helpful, is actually letting the mind go to it and clench and kind of trusting it to do what it wants to do, and then it will release, and then giving it permission to come down to the heart. I've also heard it, though, recommended to, if it's a really strong bodily knot or point of pain, like Adam was maybe referencing, is you find a refuge in the body that feels comfortable, that feels solid and is safe from the pain. And then from there you can slowly move out and almost stroke the edge of the pain like you would a frightened animal. And that can be very helpful for strong sensations of pain, I'd say too. So, okay, I think that actually might be the time we have today.